You. Yes, you. Imagine you're 19. You should be worrying about exams, first jobs, or who you'll marry. Instead, you're knee-deep in mud, gripping a rifle, staring at a horizon filled with barbed wire and smoke. A whistle blows. You climb out of the trench. And then, machine guns open fire. Welcome to World War I. The war that promised glory but delivered horror. The war that shattered empires, rewrote borders, and changed what it meant to be human. When it began in 1914, politicians promised it would be quick. Home by Christmas, they said. Instead, it dragged on for 4 years, killed more than 16 million people, and left scars that still shape our world today. This is not just the story of battles and treaties. It's the story of ordinary people, farmers, teachers, sons, daughters, thrown into the deadliest conflict the world had ever seen. This is the story of World War I, the war that changed the world. 1. The spark in Sarajevo. 2 bullets, a world on fire. It began with a car ride. June 28, 1914. Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary and his wife Sophie visited Sarajevo. Their driver made a wrong turn, and there stood Gavrilo Princip, a 19-year-old Serbian nationalist. 2 shots, 2 lives lost, and within weeks, the world was at war. Why? Alliances. Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia. Russia backed Serbia, Germany backed Austria, France and Britain backed Russia. One assassination triggered a domino effect. For ordinary people, it seemed distant at first, but newspapers screamed with headlines, "Europe at war!" Young men rushed to enlist, swept up in patriotic fever. Crowds cheered, convinced it would be a short, glorious adventure. They had no idea what awaited them. 2. The Western Front. Life in the trenches. By the winter of 1914, the Western Front was locked in stalemate. Picture this. 400 miles of trenches stretching from the North Sea to Switzerland. Your boots sink into mud. Rats the size of cats scurry over sleeping soldiers. Lice infest every seam of your uniform. Your rations, cold bread, canned meat, maybe a sip of weak tea. And every day, the constant thunder of artillery. Letters from soldiers describe the nightmare. We live like rats hiding in holes. The stench of death never leaves you. When the whistle blew, you climbed out of the trench and charged into no man's land. A wasteland of mud, craters, wire, and corpses. Across the field, machine guns waited. In battles like the Somme, tens of thousands were cut down in a single day. Poison gas added a new horror. Chlorine and mustard gas burned lungs and blinded eyes. Gas masks offered little comfort, if you even had one. War was no longer about courage or skill. It was survival in a machine of death. 3. Verdun, Somme, and the meat grinder of battle. 2 battles define the scale of WWI's brutality. Verdun and the Somme. Verdun, 1916. The Germans attacked with one goal: bleed France white. For 10 months, French and German soldiers slaughtered each other in a battle that claimed 700,000 casualties for a few miles of land. At the Somme, the Allies tried to break through. On the first day alone, Britain lost nearly 60,000 men. Entire villages back home lost all their young men in a single morning. And yet, both sides kept fighting. The war machine kept grinding. 4 beyond Europe. A world at war. This was not just Europe's war, it was global. In Africa, colonial troops were forced to fight wars they barely understood. In India, over 1 million men served, hoping loyalty would bring freedom. Instead, they returned to the same chains. In the Ottoman Empire, the Gallipoli campaign became a disaster for Britain, but a defining moment for Turkey, and for young nations like Australia and New Zealand, who honor it to this day. In the Middle East, Arab fighters guided by T.E. Lawrence of Arabia, fought against Ottoman rule, dreaming of independence. The war dragged millions into its orbit, reshaping continents far from Europe's muddy trenches. 5. Collapse of empires. By 1917, cracks appeared. In Russia, starvation and military collapse fueled revolution. The Tsar was overthrown. Lenin and the Bolsheviks seized power, promising peace, land, and bread. Russia signed the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, pulling out of the war. In Germany, hunger and despair spread. Workers went on strike. Soldiers mutinied. The Kaiser's empire was collapsing from within. The Ottoman and Austro-Hungarian empires crumbled too, leaving behind chaos and new borders that still spark conflict today. 6. America enters the fight. At first, the US stayed out. Not our war, many thought. But German submarines changed that. The sinking of ships like the Lusitania killed civilians, including Americans. Then came the Zimmermann telegram, a secret German offer to Mexico: attack the US and get back Texas, Arizona, New Mexico. America had had enough. In April 1917, the US declared war. With fresh troops and endless supplies, the balance tipped. German generals launched one last desperate offensive in 1918. It failed. The tide turned. The end was near. 6. America enters the fight. At first, the U.S. stayed out. Not our war, many thought. But German submarines changed that. The sinking of ships like the Lusitania killed civilians, including Americans. Then came the Zimmermann telegram, a secret German offer to Mexico: attack the U.S. and get back Texas, Arizona, New Mexico. America had had enough. In April 1917, the U.S. declared war. With fresh troops and endless supplies, the balance tipped. German generals launched one last desperate offensive in 1918. It failed. The tide turned. The end was near. 7. Armistice. The day the guns fell. Silent November 11th, 1918. At the 11th hour, the 11th day, the 11th month, the guns fell silent. For soldiers, the silence was surreal. After years of thunder, the world was suddenly still. Some cheered, some wept, some just sat in disbelief. For civilians, bells rang, crowds danced, flags waved. But the celebrations were mixed with grief. Millions of fathers, sons, and brothers would never come home. 8. The aftermath. The war that never ended. The Treaty of Versailles in 1919 blamed Germany, demanded crushing reparations, and carved up borders. Germany felt humiliated, betrayed. The seeds of World War II were planted, but the cost went beyond politics. A lost generation returned home broken, physically and mentally. Entire towns had no young men left. Poets like Wilfred Owen and Siegfried Sassoon captured the trauma in haunting words. The war had promised to end war. Instead, it ensured there would be another. 9. The Spanish flu pandemic, 1918-19. Just as the guns fell silent, another killer struck, one even deadlier than the war itself. The Spanish flu pandemic swept across the globe, infecting 1/3 of humanity. Soldiers returning home carried it with them. Camps, trains, and crowded cities became breeding grounds. It didn't care about uniforms, borders, or treaties. Rich or poor, soldier or civilian, all were vulnerable. By the time it was over, as many as 50 million people had died, more than the war itself. For survivors, it felt like a cruel joke. You lived through the trenches, only to face death in your own home. 10. The role of women in social change. World War I wasn't just fought on battlefields, it reshaped societies. With millions of men at the front, women stepped into roles they had never been allowed before. They worked in factories, drove ambulances, served as nurses, and kept entire economies alive. In Britain, they became known as munitionettes, producing the shells that fueled the war. For the first time, women were seen not just as caretakers, but as essential to national survival. After the war, many refused to go back to the old ways. The fight for women's suffrage gained momentum. In countries like Britain, the US, and beyond, women finally won the right to vote. The war that destroyed millions of lives also opened the door to new freedoms. Proof that even in darkness, change can take root. 11. The lost generation. Trauma and memory. The war didn't just kill millions, it scarred the minds of those who survived. Men returned home with missing limbs, blinded eyes, or lungs damaged by poison gas. But even worse was the invisible wound. Shell shock, what we now call PTSD. For many, nightmares never ended. Soldiers would wake screaming, flinching at the sound of fireworks or thunder. A whole generation of young men, writers, poets, artists, was wiped out. Those who survived expressed their trauma in words and art. Wilfred Owen wrote, "My subject is war and the pity of war." The poetry is in the pity. Eric Maria remarks, "All quiet on the Western Front," captured the emptiness of survival. The war didn't just destroy lives, it destroyed innocence. It created a lost generation, haunted by the memory of mud, blood, and endless death. 12. Technology and the future of war. World War I was the graveyard of the old and the birthplace of the new. For centuries, wars were fought with horses, sabers, and cannons. But in World War I, modern technology turned killing into an industry. Machine guns cut down waves of men in seconds. Poison gas turned the air itself into a weapon. Tanks rolled over trenches, unstoppable monsters of steel. Airplanes turned the skies into a new battlefield, where dogfights and bombings became the future of war. Submarines prowled the oceans, sinking ships without warning. The generals were stuck in the past, ordering cavalry charges into machine gun fire. But the war made it clear the future of conflict would be mechanized, industrial, and global. Every war that followed, from World War II to today, carries the shadow of the innovations of World War. World War I changed everything. It toppled empires, it redrew maps, it introduced tanks, planes, and chemical weapons. It turned warfare into an industrial slaughterhouse, and it left scars on humanity that still ache a century later. So when you hear the words, "the war to end all wars," remember, it didn't, but it did change the world forever. And the world you live in today the borders, the politics, even the technologies, all carry the fingerprints of World War I.